All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been going over the PowerPoint presentations for the 7th edition of Web Development and Design Foundations with HTML5 by Terry Felt Morris. We're up to Chapter 12, Ecommerce Overview. And in here, as it says, we want to be able to define e-commerce, identify the benefits and some of the risks of e-commerce, describe e-commerce business models, describe e-commerce security and encryption, define the concept of electronic data interchange, identify trends and projections for e-commerce, describe issues related to e-commerce, and finally describe some of the options for order and payment processing that we talk about with e-commerce. Now, as we start here, on page 503, e-commerce is defined as the buying and selling of goods and services on the internet. So this chapter is just really meant to be an overview. They give you a formal definition of e-commerce. You see it on the screen here, and it's also in the book on page 504. The integration of communications, data management, and security technologies which allow users or individuals and organizations to exchange information related to the sale of goods and services. So again, it is very similar to what we just talked about before. It's the ability to buy and sell over the internet. The major functions, the buying of goods, the selling of goods, and performing financial transactions on the internet. Here's some of your advantages. Reduce costs. When you think about it, I've used as an example before a place like Barnes & Noble. And Barnes & Noble for years was a brick and mortar store. You went into Barnes & Noble and you bought a book. But now it can be the middle of the night, and if you decide you got a hankering for a book or you need it for a class or whatever, you can go online because it's open 24 hours a day. And, basically, they need to check their inventory, which is in a database someplace, to see whether or not they've got the book, in stock. You get increased customer satisfaction. All right, because again, typically, you might go into a Barnes & Noble store, for example, and they may not have the book you're looking for, but you can go order it online. If you're willing to wait a couple days, you can get it. And with most of those, you can have it sent to a store, or you can have it sent right to you for an additional cost. More effective data management. Again, there's less people involved. Much of it is just automated. You put all that stuff together, it should lead to higher sales. Advantages for customers, convenience. Again, you can shop any time of day. You don't have to get dressed up. You don't have to get dressed to shop. It's easier for you to comparison shop. If I want to buy something at Walmart as opposed to buying it, a sporting goods thing maybe at Walmart as opposed to Dick's or something like that, I can check out a lot of places. There's a wider selection of goods online because it's a virtual catalog. Well, along with the good are some bads, so to speak. There are risks. Loss of sales. All right, you need a robust, reliable website, because if people don't like your website, and especially if you're an online store or online only or online mainly store, if people aren't going to come out to your website, you're in trouble. Fraudulent transactions. All right, people who get a hold of credit cards or do things they shouldn't do. Customer reluctance to purchase online. Some people, especially the elderly, and for example, I'll put my mother in that. I've told my mom before, she doesn't even want to get a cell phone. Period. She still uses her landline. She does have a computer that she uses now and then. Mainly, she keeps in touch with friends of hers that are around the country. All right, on email. Increased competition. So a company that operates out of a basement might be just as successful or as impressive as a company as a Walmart if they've got a good enough looking website. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Consumers have possible risks too. Security issues. You know, you've got to make sure, and we'll talk about this as we go on in here, that you're using, whenever you're giving any kind of personal information, that you've got an SSL connection. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it now, because we will talk about it if we haven't already. Privacy issues. Many sites post privacy statements. All right. Purchasing based on photos and description. You know, there's nothing like holding a book before you purchase it, paging through it, etc. Possible difficulties with returns. There are some places that, you know, I don't know if they've changed, but I know for a while with Amazon, you could only do like up to, I think it was 6 returns a year. So let's talk about some of the e-commerce business models that are explained on page 506. The first is probably the best known, B2C, business to consumer. You know, a good example of that is the business is Amazon and you're the consumer. You can buy books through there, you can buy clothes through there, you can buy electronics through there, etc. One of the more up and coming is B2B, business to business. All right, you also include electronic data interchange in there, which we'll talk about in more depth in a little later. C2C, consumer to consumer. Think about a place like eBay. Okay, and then finally another one that's getting more popular is business to government. All right. In one of my other lifetimes, back in the, when was that? Maybe the early 90s? I spent a year as an electronic data interchange programmer analyst. And the company that I was working for that made governors for airplanes, among other things, but they were basically an electronic type of company. What they wanted to do was they wanted to take all of the work that they'd been doing for purchase order acknowledgments, etc. They wanted it all to go paperless. And I was responsible, during my tenure there, I had to go and check out different companies that were EDI partners. And I went and looked at quite a few of them. I actually took a class. I took it twice because they let me, for the place that we actually settled on that was out of Detroit. But again, EDI is a paperless type of society. And it's funny because years ago, and we're talking like in maybe the late 80s, I went to a presentation in Stevens Point, Wisconsin that was on paperless, you know, the company's going paperless. Funny thing is, you might say, well, big deal. It was put on by a paper company. So it seemed a little bit weird that a paper company would be putting on something about paperless societies. And in fact, the presentation was about an hour, hour and a half. And after it was over, I stayed around and I was talking to the guy who gave the presentation. I introduced myself and I told him it sounded a little funny that we were going to be listening to a presentation on a paperless society from a paper company. He just smiled and said, most companies that go paperless end up actually generating more paper rather than less. Because especially older management types just can't believe that everything is online and they have it there. So, all right, some e-commerce statistics. What do people buy online? The same thing here is shown on page 507. Now, the important thing is when you look at this stuff, just take a look at the list that's here. All right? And in particular, concentrate on number 2, number 3, number 4, and I'll just use those, 2, 3, and 4. You can maybe say 1, 2, depending. Why? Because these are some high-ticket items. When you're talking about people buying electronics and appliances online, all right, buying a refrigerator online, for example, you're not going to pick up one of those typically for much under $1,000. All right. So as time's gone on, more and more people are buying things online. This is an interesting thing, again, from page 507. The online population. The percentage of people that use the internet. All right, I'm in this area right here, but notice it's still more than 8 out of 10. The funny thing is, take a look at when you're younger. There it's more than 9 out of 10. It's almost 10 out of 10. All right? And there's not that much disparity in here. But notice household income, 75 grand or higher, 96% use the internet. That's a big target population, and those are typically people who are making a lot of money. So what kind of issues do you get with e-commerce? The first one is intellectual property. You may or may not have heard of the idea of cyber squatting. And I'll give you an example of that. Let's assume that I'll use Bernie Sanders. That Bernie Sanders, before he decided to run for the presidency, did not have a website. So there was no BernieSanders.com. Okay? But somebody had heard that he was mulling, possibly running for the presidency. So they went out and bought BernieSanders.com. They bought that domain name. Now Bernie wants to buy the name, or get the name, register it, and somebody already has it. But they're willing to sell it to him for a price. That's cyber squatting. Security. You hear about things, and this may or may not make sense to you, but there are things that are called like DOS attacks, which stands for denial of service, where you have so many people call a number that they get overloaded and it goes down. So maybe you've got some kind of a special where you're offering 50% off on your product, and you expect maybe hundreds of people will call up, but thousands call up. All right? There's always fraud problems. Taxation problems. What tax do you use? Do you use the tax of the person buying? Do you use the tax rate of the company that's selling the product, etc.? And international issues, which are even bigger. Now, when you start to talk about security, there's a few things to talk about in here. The first one, as it says, is encryption. And that's how you convert data into an unreadable form and then back to a readable form again. When you encrypt, you're making it unreadable. When you decrypt, you're sending it back to its original form. All right? So you encrypt into what's typically referred to as ciphertext, and you decrypt back into what's typically called clear text. This process requires some kind of an algorithm for you to use and some kind of a key. Now, there are pictures in the book on page 509 that show a single key, and they show a key pair. Okay? But if we look at a couple of these, the idea is with symmetric key encryption, which is the first one that's discussed there, it's called single key encryption. Both the encryption and the decryption use the same key. So the key must be kept secret from other people, but both the sender and the receiver must know the key before they can communicate. It's fast, which is its biggest advantage. There is asymmetric key encryption. It's also called public key because there's no shared secret. Rather, two keys are created at the same time. The key pair contains a public key and a private key. They're mathematically related to one another, so it's unlikely that anyone would be able to guess, all right, what's going on. There's other things in here too. All right, there's hash encryptions, and there are other things. Now, SSL, Secure Socket Layer. Sometimes today it's also referred to as TLS, which I believe is Transport Layer Security. And I'm going to give you an example I've used before. You may or may not have seen it in some of these tapes. I don't know. But if I come out here and I go out to Amazon.com, all right, and I decide, in fact, let's see. I guess it's not showing me that. I go over here to books. And let's see that I want a copy of the web development. I'll put in Terry Felk Morris was the author. Terry Felk Morris was the author of your book. All right, there's the book right there. So I click here. And I say, ooh, that looks pretty good. I want to add that to my cart. All right, do you notice I'm already here, which is surprising me, but I'm already here on HTTPS. All right, it's already got me there. But let's back up a little bit more. All right, it looks like Amazon, I'm already here. As soon as I got into Amazon, I'm already into HTTPS, which is surprising. All right, but again, is any of this stuff important? Let me just tell you. So I'm going to come in here and like we just did. Okay, I'm over on this. Let's put in here again, Terry Felk Morris. Okay, so I come in here and boom, I grab this. All right, now I want to add it to my cart. Now I want to go and check out. Now is the time that's really important when you think about it for there to be an HTTPS connection in there. And what that means is it has to be extra secure, whatever you want to call it. SSL is a protocol that allows data to be privately exchanged over public networks. All right, bottom line. It allows two computers to communicate securely. And the way that they do that, the way that this is done, all right, so we looked a little at symmetric and asymmetric and hash, etc. All right, but the way that this is done is it uses the HTTPS protocol. That S means secure, all right, and it shows the lock there. Okay? So notice what it says here that it provides. You know, I used to work at a different institution, and a guy who used to work there with me, he's not there anymore, and neither am I, but somebody asked him once, his name is Doug Tabbitt. A student came up one day and asked him, and I heard this. They said, Mr. Tabbitt, I just bought a new computer, and I want it to be as secure as possible. So can you tell me what I can do? And he said, sure. Don't ever turn it on. And a few people laughed and stuff, and they were like, well, I've got to turn it on because I've got to do certain things with it. And he said, okay, then never use the internet. And they said, well, that's why I bought it, was so I can buy stuff online, pay bills, etc. So then your computer will never be totally secure. All right, this is a guy who left the school I was at to become a chief information security officer. He was also a master cryptologist in the Army, and that's him saying that stuff. So it enables computers to communicate securely with one another, all right? And it does that by posting what's called a digital certificate. And a digital certificate is a type of asymmetric key that contains also information about the certificate. All right, the contents of the certificate include the public key, the date of the certificate, the expiry date of the certificate, details about the certificate authority and holder, and some stuff about the content. If you want to obtain one of these digital certificates, you request it from a certificate authority called a CA, and you pay a fee. The CA verifies your identity. It issues the certificate and supplies the public-private key pair. So that's the CA right there. VeriSign is probably the best known, as far as I know, it's probably the best known certificate authority. Now, as mentioned here, there's a number of steps that are required as far as obtaining one of these certificates. Again, request the certificate, pay a fee, and that's what the certificate authority does. It's kind of a go-between to make sure you and whoever you want to do business with are able to do business. The last part of the chapter, starting on the bottom of page 512, talks a little bit about some of the order and payment processing with e-commerce. The first thing they talk about is cash. Well, again, you're not... I always remember my mother saying, never send cash through the mail. All right, it's really not a bad policy when you think about it. But instead of cash, you can use e-cash. You purchase digital money from a bank and deposit in a digital wallet. Then you can immediately transfer funds. And there are a lot of places that do that today. You can have credit, where you've got a merchant account. It's a type of business bank account that allows a business to accept credit card payments. Smart cards, which are similar to a credit card, but they have an integrated circuit or a chip inside instead of a magnetic strip. Mobile payments, and a lot of people do that today, where they pay things online. Some e-commerce storefront solutions on pages 514 and 515. You probably heard or shopped at online stores and found that some work well and some maybe don't work so well. A problem for e-commerce sites is abandoned shopping carts. People who put stuff in a cart but never place an order. All right. And there's a lot of different types of e-commerce storefront options available. Some are simple, some are more complex. For example, with an instant online storefront, you can set something like this up. There are products out there that will do it for you. Shopify is probably the best known one in big commerce. But you can set up your site so it's basically point and click. Off-the-shelf shopping cart software where you can buy things that already exist. ZenCart is probably the best known one out of all these. There's custom-built solutions. If you're willing to pay somebody to build it for you, they'll build some to all of it for you. And semi-custom, where maybe they'll build you a framework and you have to add to it. So this chapter was meant to just introduce some of the basic e-commerce concepts and implementations. All right? So, the next chapter in the book that we will be going over, Chapter 13, starts on page 533 and talks about web promotion. I'll be back with that lecture shortly.